We're still going to give it a couple more minutes for people to come in. There's a lot of people here. How many people would call themselves JavaScript developers used on a daily basis? Okay, a few of you. How many of you would call yourselves like server-side developers? Java, C#, that kind of thing. Awesome. So that's actually really good, because I think you server-side guys are really gonna like what you're gonna see. Because if you're like some of the folks I know, server-side developers are a little bit scared of JavaScript. They're like, oh man, there's so many weird rules and stuff. I can't remember them all. That kind of thing. So you're gonna really like TypeScript. So it's the perfect audience. And those of you who like JavaScript are gonna like this too, because you're gonna see some stuff that you might have thought wasn't in TypeScript, which is. So that'll be really cool. Give it a minute or so. I should play some like elevator music or something.
Get the Spotify list out.
Yeah. I have the internet at my fingertips. I don't think I can though, because I'm gonna get content ID.
You're gonna get content ID. Never mind.
So I don't think I should play any music. Oh, I know what I can do. I'll show you. I have, let's see. There was, no, I don't remember what it was. There's a royalty-free playlist collection that you can listen to. All right, sweet. Let's get started. All right, so my name is Kamran Ayub. For those of you who attended last Code Camp in October, awesome. Did any of you guys attend my demystifying TypeScript talk? No one. Awesome. So that's fine. So my last talk that I gave was all about just like myths and other misconceptions surrounding TypeScript. But that's not what I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to be doing TypeScript in action. However, I'm going to be explaining TypeScript as I go, but if you want a more foundational like presentation, you should go to that one, because that has some more foundational stuff about TypeScript, but I'll try to explain as I go, so because it sounds like a lot of you are not familiar with TypeScript. What? It's on YouTube, right? Yes, it's on YouTube. I have a link in the presentation. This presentation is online on GitHub, on my GitHub account, and it's being recorded currently in this little microphone. So, all right, let's get started. So, meet me, Kamran Ayub. That's me. That's a monkey on my head. I'll explain that later. I work at General Mills, so I'm a web application consultant. I've been there for about 5.5 years. I've been in the industry for over a decade. Started when I was a young teenie in high school. So I've been doing this a long time. This is my GitHub account. You can see I'm very active in the open source community. I have a few repositories that people use. This one's actually surprisingly popular. For whatever reason, I was just checking my NuGet and my NPM feeds, and I saw that this bad boy has like 15,000 downloads. So it's pretty popular, and I didn't even realize it. So if you want to follow me there, you can see all the cool stuff I'm doing. I work on these little projects right there. If you really, really want to see TypeScript in action. So today's demo is going to be very stripped down because I want to get to the nuts and bolts. But if you want to see real production quality TypeScript, you can go check out the open source project I contribute to. This guy owns it, Excalibur.js. It's just a HTML5 game engine, but it's written all in TypeScript. And you can kind of see what it's actually like in the real world. So, with that in mind, probably the most interesting thing that happened to me recently was I took a 6-month sabbatical, and I was me and my wife lived in France for 6 months. So this is the little town that we lived in. It's called Aix-en-Provence. It's in the south of France. It's a very beautiful city. It's right by Marseille. Marseille is not as beautiful. Aix-en-Provence is where all the like wealthier people go. So they go work in Marseille, and then they commute back to Aix. So that's the fountain in the middle of the city center. We visit a lot of other places. This is the London Eye. These are all pictures I took. Dublin, which was pretty awesome. Imagine living right there on the edge of the sea. It's pretty sweet. We also visited Oslo. So this is a Scandinavian church. The Wi-Fi is very spotty. So this was really cool. My wife is Norwegian descent, so she really wanted to go to Oslo to see where her family was from. And so this is one of the historical Scandinavian churches that they have. We also traveled around France itself. So this is Bordeaux. The cool thing about Bordeaux, you can kind of see here, it's a little bit hard to see, but this below in the south of the photo right here in the bottom half, this is actually UNESCO World Heritage Site. The entire city center is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And also they have the best wine. So no one's lying when they say Bordeaux wine. Like, the wine is awesome. And I don't know anything about wine, but we went to a wine tasting, and they have this thing called the gold wine, and it was probably the best wine I've ever had. It was so good. But my heart lies in the south of France. So you can see when people say the French Riviera or La Provence, this is what they're talking about. It's very picturesque. It's beautiful. So with that, let's get into the presentation. Let's explain for a second, what is TypeScript? The official definition of TypeScript is that it's a typed superset of JavaScript that compiles into plain idiomatic JavaScript. That sounds pretty cool, but what does that even mean, really? So it means a few things. So TypeScript compiles into readable JavaScript, and it's very important that you understand what compiles means and what readable means. So when I say TypeScript is a compiled language, it means that you run a compiler against the TypeScript, and the output of the compiler is JavaScript. So a lot of people don't really understand that or didn't know that, but when you write TypeScript, what comes out is JavaScript. So this is very important, because sometimes I get questions like, well, what browser does TypeScript support? Or where can I run TypeScript? Don't think about that. It outputs JavaScript. JavaScript works everywhere. We know that, right? So this when I say a typed superset, a superset means that all valid JavaScript is valid TypeScript. So this is also important. This is what differentiates TypeScript from other languages like Dart or CopyScript or transpiled languages. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, which means all JavaScript is TypeScript. So that's very important to keep in mind. And TypeScript gets its name from the main feature that it provides, which is optional static typing. This keyword is also very important, because I know a lot of people think that you must use types in TypeScript. That is not true, and you're going to see that today. It adds optional static typing. So you can opt into the type safety if you want to. Otherwise, if you want to live on the edge like all JavaScript developers do, you can still do that. So this is why I love TypeScript, and I think you server-side guys will also like it. It's because it brings together the best of type languages and the dynamic nature of JavaScript. So if you still want to do some loosey-goosey JavaScript stuff where you're changing properties to all sorts of different things, you totally can still do that. But if you want a little bit more of a safety net and you want to work with a large team on a large application, you're going to see a lot of benefit using TypeScript. So the last thing is that it prevents a lot of classes of issues before runtime. So this is also an important point. When I say issues, I'm not just talking about errors. Okay, so there are things that when you're a JavaScript developer you accept, such as when you're going to find errors when you run your page in Chrome, and it's going to throw up an error, and you're going to be like, oh, okay, I got to make that change. That's kind of what I'm talking about. So it prevents some of those classes of errors. But I'm also talking about the philosophical, prevents all sorts of issues, human issues, when people are reading your code. We spend about 80% of our time reading code. So we only spend about 10% actually writing code. So imagine, TypeScript helps with that 80%. It helps you write more readable code. It helps you write more discoverable code. You're trying to learn a library. It helps you learn the library a lot better. And I'm going to show examples of that throughout this presentation. So just keep that in mind when you're watching me type. If you can try and figure out what my application is doing or what the sample code is doing before I even explain it, then that is going to tell you how well TypeScript is doing at helping you write more readable code and making you more productive. So, like I said, I'm not here to address myths around TypeScript. If you have questions about that, leave them to the end. If you want to get the whole overview of why TypeScript is different from things like Dart and stuff like that, I have a previous talk. It's a little bit hard to see. TypeScript Demystified. It's on my presentations. It's on YouTube. You can watch it later if you like. So this is a code camp. That's all the slides I have. So we're going to be working in a sample application. The sample application is written in Angular2 and it is using ASP.NET. None of that really matters. I want you to focus on the actual TypeScript. So it's a very stripped down demo. There's not a whole lot of code in there, and that's on purpose because I don't want to distract you with stuff like Angular2 and ASP.NET, but it's useful to see it running in that context. And some of the patterns you're going to see me use are specific to Angular2, so I'm going to point those out. And so you'll get a little bit of taste of what Angular2 is going to be like, and then you'll get to see what TypeScript is like. So that's it for slides. It's time to see TypeScript in action. All right. So let's talk about tools for a second. This is Visual Studio. How many of you use Visual Studio? Awesome. Most of you are familiar with. Who does not use Visual Studio? Okay, a few of you. And then are you guys, do you have like Macs or Linux or something like that? So I mentioned that because if you don't have Visual Studio and you're also not on Windows, you're not left out. So there's a really great editor called Visual Studio Code. It's cross-platform. If you just want to do TypeScript development, all you need is this. It's only like a 50 meg download. It works cross-platform. It has full TypeScript support, Node.js debugging, Chrome debugging. It's going to have the new cross-platform .NET support. It's excellent. So here you can even see that I have some stuff open, and for example, we can even go and take a look at some of the TypeScript stuff. So it has full TypeScript support. So you can see that even IntelliSense and all that kind of stuff is in Visual Studio Code. So I'm just pointing this out because if you're a Windows hater or you don't have Windows, you can totally still get on the TypeScript bandwagon. So I'm using Visual Studio 2015. There's a free version called Community, has full features. So don't think that you have to pay $150 to use Visual Studio. Community is totally free. That's what I use at home. So that's that. Now I have my little application. So here's what it looks like. Have any of you used Goodreads? The Goodreads application? Yeah. Okay. So if you're not familiar, all it does is lets you like manage the books that you want to read. So you can add stuff to your wish list. You can create custom lists. You can share them with people. You can add books. You can search for books. You can rate them, et cetera, et cetera. So this is our little sample app. We're going to just have a little app that has a list of books in my collection, and then will also let me go and find some books, right? So that's our Angular2 application. It starts, let me just show you really quick. If we go and see all the HTML associated, like the server-side HTML associated with this, that's all it is. So get used to this if you want to make an Angular2 application. There's not a lot of server-side HTML, as you can see. This is the only server-side HTML with a very, very limited, like just basic boilerplate stuff, right? So this is the body, and then inside the body is my app, all right? So there's not a lot to show there. Where it all comes together is this bootstrapping file called main.ts. So this is what Angular is going to load right away. And now you can already see TypeScript in action right here. So how many of you are familiar with modules? Okay, a lot of you. That's good. So modules let you modularize, compartmentalize your code, and then you can compartmentalize your application. So you can create modules for specific parts of your application, and then if you want to use them, you can import them. So you're taking in dependency. So it's basically a way of decoupling your code, and then a lot of people create modules and then share them with other people. So some of these modules, for example, Angular2 and reactive extensions for JS, those are all third-party modules that I'm taking in. Now I have them installed over here on in the Node modules folder. we're going to ignore all that. So I have all my dependencies here. They're on the file system. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a module loader called system.js, and I'm importing these modules. Now, for those of you who do JavaScript, you might be wondering, where is the system.js module part of this? I don't see anything that's related to system.js. Or if you're using something like require.js, why is there no like require.js stuff? So in ECMAScript 6, they have this import syntax, this import module syntax. TypeScript lets you use it right now, so that's pretty awesome. And we can see I'm not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. So this is what TypeScript will generate, and there you can see there it generates the system.js module. And what's really neat is I can just go into here and I can actually change the module type that it's loading. So if I go here and I hit get some IntelliSense, I can use AMD modules, Common JS modules, ES 2015 modules, ES6, pretty much all the standard stuff. And then what TypeScript will do when it compiles, it'll use that module system and it'll generate the code needed to do your module. So this is pretty awesome. So here, let me just show you side by side here. So this is the TypeScript that I'm writing. So I'm importing my reactive extensions, I'm importing some components that I have, and then I'm calling this bootstrap, and I'm bootstrapping my application. So here you can see that this is where the bootstrap call comes in, right? And then up here at the top is where my modules are coming. And so TypeScript is generating all this code for me. And a lot of this is specific to system.js. So this is all boilerplate stuff that I don't have to write because TypeScript is doing it for me. Okay, productivity win there. So let's go take a look. We have our book list right here, but unfortunately there's no books that are showing up. So let's go take a look. I have right here my little task list. So I have a to-do. My first to-do here is to get some books from my book service when the user loads the page. So Angular2 is organized into these things called components. So a component in Angular2 is just some metadata that surrounds a function, and it tells Angular that you should treat this as an Angular component. So it adds a bunch of metadata and stuff around that. This is how you actually tell Angular2 that something is a component. So this is using a feature called ES7 decorators. So notice I said ES7. So this is ECMAScript 7. So almost no browser supports this yet. And yet, I'm able to use it in TypeScript because all it does is it generates the polyfills and boilerplate code that I need to use it. So this is bringing a feature that I may not be able to use for 2 to 3 years in my regular JavaScript application, but I can use it right now because TypeScript brings those features to me. So this is an important thing about TypeScript. TypeScript is modeled after all the future versions of JavaScript. So all the syntax that you see in here, like from the import syntax to the decorator syntax, these are all working draft or final draft approved syntaxes. So it's not going to change over time. So this is really important. Okay, just keep that in mind. So here I have this little decorator. And a decorator, all it really is behind the scenes is a function, and you can pass in some options. So now I can already see that I'm getting some benefit from using TypeScript because maybe I'm not too familiar with how Angular components work. Well, I can actually see here that these are all the options that an Angular component gets, right? And then I can even go take a look. You know, so selector is a type of string. Style URLs, it can be an array of strings. Template URL is a string. So I already know while I'm learning this application that these are the types that Angular2 expects, so I can write those. So the next part, classes. So ECMAScript 6 introduces classes, the class syntax. I think one of the points of feedback that I kind of hear sometimes is I don't want to use classes. That's okay, you don't have to. Classes are just a nice thing. If you want to use them, you can. Angular2 is organized around classes, so that's why I'm using them. But for server-side developers, this is going to feel pretty similar to writing C# and Java, right? Because here we have the class members, and we even have accessibility modifiers. We have public, we have protected, we have static, we have, private. So we have all those different types of accessors, and that's because since TypeScript is compiled, the compiler knows all about those types of accessors. So that's pretty awesome. I can even leave off an accessor, so I can even just say books, and this is like just saying var books, var books equals my empty array. So that's pretty awesome. Then I have my constructor. So this is the function that's going to get called when I call new. When I say new book list component, the code in here is going to run. So in regular JavaScript, in fact, we can go take a look at what this generates. You can see that this is how I would write a class in vanilla JavaScript. I'm creating a closure, a self-executing function, and I have my constructor right here. I'm saying this.books equals my new array, and then here I'm returning it to the calling code. This stuff that you see, this decorate and these decorate metadata stuff, this is to support ES7 decorators. So again, this is all code that I don't have to write because TypeScript is doing it for me. So that's awesome. So let's actually get some books from my book service, and you can see that I have a book service here, but it doesn't actually have any code. So I'm importing some nice helpers from Angular. Angular2 and Angular1 support dependency injection, and in Angular2, this is how you declare something as injectable. So all you're saying is you're just decorating the class, and you're saying, hey, inject me when I'm requested. So we're going to do that. So let's write a method that's going to get some books from our API, and I can show you the API is running. So if I go to API/books, I get this data back. So it has a data property, and then it has what I assume are different books that come back. So we're going to try and go and get those. So we're going to create a method called getBooks, creating it here. And now I have a problem, right? Because I need to use Ajax to go and get this stuff. So how am I going to do that? Well, like I said, Angular2 supports dependency injection. So I'm going to create my constructor, and then I'm going to do constructor injection. So I'm going to say private HTTP, and then I'm going to use HTTP, which is what I imported from Angular. So this is a class or a service. What in Angular is called a service. So it's a service that I'm getting from Angular, and I'm importing it, and now I'm assigning it to a private variable called _HTTP. And see here, you can see when I hover over it, Visual Studio is telling me this is a property that you have on your book service called _HTTP, and it's of type HTTP. Awesome. So now I can say this dot, and I'm getting some IntelliSense to help me along, right? So _HTTP, and I'm new to Angular, so I don't really know what's available to me on HTTP. Well, now because of TypeScript and the awesome documentation that it gives me, I can actually see that I may want something called get, right? Because I want to do an HTTP request. I want to go and get the stuff from my API, and then I don't know what to pass to this. But because I'm using TypeScript, again, this is making me more productive. I'm discovering this API as I write it. I'm not opening up Chrome, going to Google MDN, going to Angular2 documentation, looking up the API. What are the parameters I pass to this API? I'm not doing any of that. So I've already saved myself like 5 minutes just by opting into this. So if I say API books, if there's other options I even want to pass, I can even see like what are the different options here that I have. I have body, headers, method, etc. So that's sweet. And now what do I do? What do I do after this? Well, I can see that if I hover over this, I can see that the return type that I have from TypeScript is an observable of type response. So is anyone familiar with reactive extensions for JS? Yeah, okay, so a couple people. So reactive extensions for JS is a third-party library, and it adds these things called observables. And all an observable is something that can change, and when it changes, it notifies you when it changes. Okay, so that's a simplistic explanation of what an observable is. But what's really cool is if I'm not too familiar with it, I can say dot, right? So I'm getting my IntelliSense, and I know ahead of time, but I want to use something called subscribe. And because TypeScript is loading all the documentation from the module, you can see that I'm getting an explanation of what I'm supposed to type in here. So I'm going to say subscribe. And now I'm going to use a new feature in ECMAScript 6, but I can use it today using TypeScript. I'm going to use a lambda function. So I'm going to say results. So what I just did there is I'm using the little arrow, and this is what's called a lambda function or an arrow function. It actually has a special meaning in ECMAScript 6 or JavaScript. What it does is it binds the this context, the this scope, to the scope of your function. So historically, if I was writing, let's say, vanilla JavaScript, what I would probably do is I'd say var, handle, and I'd say function, take some results, do that, and then I would say handle fn dot bind this, right? So I'm setting the context of my function. I'm setting the this, right? Because we all know if we're doing JavaScript development, sometimes this isn't what you think it is, right? So the arrow function just makes that a lot easier. So I'm going to say results, and then I can say, hey, what are my results that are coming back? Okay, it's a response. All right, that's what I expected. So I think what I want to say is response. Oops, sorry, results. And then I have these parameters. I want to get the JSON. So this is a function. So you can see here, if you're not familiar, I mean, as you type it, it says attempts to return body as parsed JSON. Okay, that's exactly what I need. So I'm going to go and get that. And here's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to return JSON. And now what's happening? So I'm not getting any IntelliSense here. So this is what I'm talking about when I say opt into the type system. So if I hover over this JSON, you can see that the return type is any. So this is a special type that TypeScript has called the any type, and it basically represents like a JavaScript where you can just assign types willy-nilly however you want to. So this type can be anything. It could be, I don't know what it is. TypeScript doesn't know what it is. So there's no IntelliSense, right? So I say .data. Now remember, .data, this should look familiar to you because it's right there, right? So all I'm doing is I'm just following the property tree. So I'm saying .data, and then I want to return. Get rid of this. So you can see I'm not using any types right now in TypeScript. I haven't written a type yet. I'm not annotating anything. The only annotation I've made so far is this. So I'm saying HTTP is of type HTTP. But you notice that my get books, I don't say what it returns. And here I don't say what I expect it to be. And when I return it, what's it going to say? So if I hover over get books, it says that it returns a subscription. So this is what subscribe does. So I'm just going to change it quick to map. So what map does is very similar to the map function on arrays. So it just takes the observable, takes whatever's inside of it, and then runs a map function and then returns that. So now, if I hover over get books, what I see is what I expect. So it's saying that this method, get books, returns an observable of any. I don't know what you're returning me, but it's an observable of type any. And so this is you might have recognized that this is what's called a generic type. So a generic type is just a type template, right? So it just wraps one to many different kinds of types, and it tells you the observable contains some data that is of type any. So TypeScript supports generic types, which is really cool. So now I want to call getBooks. So
undo your map.
No, I want my map because I want to take the response that I get, and I want to go and get the JSON back, and I want to return it. So I'm trying to return that array back that I get from the API. So now what I want to do is I want to go and take a dependency on my book service and call it. So I'm going to say import book service from book.service, and now I have my book service, and now I'm going to create a reference to it. So I'm going to do book service, and then you can see already I'm starting to get my IntelliSense. And then I want to do something else. What I want to do ideally is when I go to this page and I load this, right when the user hits the page, I want to show their books, right? So I want it to be like when it initializes. So how can I do that? Well, I can actually import on init. So what just happened here? This is important. So I am referencing a module that's on my file system, and yet I'm getting IntelliSense for everything that's inside that module. So you don't believe me, I can say, what else do I want from Angular core? Well, I can import a binding, I can import what other kinds of like life cycle events are there? There's on changes, on destroy, on init, all this stuff that I get that I don't have to read the documentation for getting to. Now, what on init is an interface. So TypeScript supports interfaces. So if I can say implements on init, and we know what interfaces do, they're a contract for your class, right? So it says, if you don't implement what I say, I'm going to throw a compiler error. And sure enough, if I hover over this, it says property ng on init is missing and type book list component. Thanks TypeScript. So I think I need something called ng on init. And now I do that and it goes away. So TypeScript is already helping me. So now let's call my book service. So we're going to say this dot book service. And now I'm starting to get IntelliSense for the stuff I'm writing.
Quick question.
Yes.
Would you have gotten the auto implement shortcut on that red squiggly?
So
No.
ReSharper will give it to you. The Visual Studio tooling has some refactoring capabilities. You can do rename and stuff like that, but some of the more fancy, like C-sharpish type ReSharper stuff, you have to get ReSharper. And I specifically disabled ReSharper, so everything you're seeing is like vanilla Visual Studio. But yes, that would be awesome. So I'm getting my books. Now here's where I want to subscribe. This is where I want to subscribe. So now I'm getting my books. All right. So this subscribe function, I didn't really describe it very well. So when I call .subscribe, that's what triggers the observable. So otherwise observables are lazy. So they won't do anything and they won't throw an event unless someone is subscribing to them. So now I'm subscribing. So this is kind of what triggers an observable. So I'm subscribing. I have my books. Now this is a problem because if I'm working on a big team and someone else is trying to use my Git books, wouldn't it be nice if I could just kind of tell them that this actually returns books? Because currently what's happening is that TypeScript is saying I'm returning anything. Well, that's not good. So let's fix that. So this is where I'm going to opt into the type system, like I said. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a typecast. So I'm going to say that this returns an array of books. Now the problem is TypeScript's going to warn me, what is a book? I don't know what a book is. Can you tell me what a book is? Please, I don't know anything about a book. So we're going to create a book for you. So we're going to go and add a new TypeScript file. We're going to call it book. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to describe a very simple interface called book. And for my book, I want something, let's see, we can actually go and take a look. I want API/books. So I have an ID. And what type is my ID? It's a number. I have a title. That's a type string. All right, so on and so forth. So I have my author. I have added. This is important. So I have my added. Let's add that. Added. So I'm getting from my API. I'm getting this added right here. This looks like a date, doesn't it? So in my client-side application, I want to treat this as a date. So let's treat it as a date. So I'm giving it the date type because when I work with a book, I want added to be a date. And we're going to see for a second that's going to cause a problem. So now I'm saying return book. Okay. So let's export this, and then in my book service, we can import book from ./book. So this / right here, all it's saying is next to me. So it's the current directory. So / is the current directory. Import book. So that's the book.ts. So now if I go back to my component and I hover over get books, now take a look. So now TypeScript knows that this is an array of books. Awesome. So now developers who are using my service know that it returns an array of books. And because of that, I now get IntelliSense for an array. So I have my array. What I want to just say is this.books. So again, because I'm using an arrow function, the scope of this is my class. So I can see I get IntelliSense. This.books equals books. All right. So now if I hover over what's this property books, TypeScript is saying, well, it could be anything. So let's fix that. Really what this is a book array, right? So we have our book array. We're going to do the same thing. Import book from book. Boom, done. So now let's see where this got us. So I'm going to go back to my app, and if it compiled, I'm going to hit refresh. I think I have to hit this.
What actually compiled it?
So what's actually compiling it is Visual Studio. So Visual Studio has tooling inside of it that will read your TypeScript files, and the project definition is this tsconfig. So I have compile on save set up so that when I hit save, it's compiling it in the background. But Visual Studio is doing that for me. If you're using something like VS Code, what you'd actually do is you'd set up a task. So for example, on Excalibur, we use grunt. So this is setting up a grunt task, which is actually going to go and compile the TypeScript. But in Visual Studio, it's doing it behind the scenes. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-B. I'm going to compile my application. And if I have done things correctly, I should see some indication of some books. And if I don't, it's because I've done something wrong, and we can actually see what I've done wrong. So it's still loading. Hey, look at that. So we have some books. Let's take a closer look here. So let me just zoom out a little bit. I have some books, but there's a problem. And the problem is that I'm seeing some other rows here, but the rows are empty. So what's going on there? So the cool thing about Angular is that it has really great error messages. So if I go over here and I scroll to the top, I can actually see right here, invalid argument. So here it's saying invalid argument, this date, for my Angular pipe called date pipe. So what it's saying basically is that you're passing me a string, not a date. I can't do anything with a string. You told me that it's supposed to be a date. I'm not sure what to do, so I'm going to blow up in your face. So we're going to fix that. This is what I was talking about. So here I've said added is a type of date. Well, why didn't Angular know about that? So this is important. TypeScript is a compile time language. So all the type information you're going to get from TypeScript is at compile time. It's not at runtime. So JavaScript is saying that I'm being passed a string, not a date. And that's easy to see because if I go here and I go to API/books, sure enough, what's coming back from the API is a string. So I got to do something about that. So I need to transform that string into a date. And this is what's usually called mapping, right? So I'm trying to map my server-side type to my client-side type. And we do this all the time. We write little functions that map stuff from, create a new date from a string, change this enum into a string, change this integer into an enum, etc. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to take my book, and I'm going to say map again, and then I'm going to take my book inside my function here, and I'm going to say return book. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say book.added equals new date book.added. Now TypeScript's going to complain. So what it's going to say is it's going to say, hey, this is a date and you're trying to create a new date, but the date constructor only accepts a string. So it's trying to save me from myself, right? Because I've said that book.added is a type of date and I'm trying to create a new date. But TypeScript is trying to save me. It's trying to say that if I look at the date constructor, it can take a number, and there are 3 overloads. So let's take a look at what those overloads are. So I have empty constructor. I have a value that is a type number. I have a value of type string. That's the one that I want to use. Or I can have the long constructor, like I can construct a date from year, month, date, etc. So how can I tell TypeScript that treat the JSON that's coming back from the API, treat it as a string, because I know it's a string, so trust me. So what I can say is I can say, actually, book.added is any type, right? So now what I've said is I'm telling the type system to treat book.added as any type so that it gets rid of the compiler error. Because I know I know as a developer that what's coming back from my API is a string, not a date. But I just want to transform it into a date so that my errors go away. So I can hit save here, and then let's see if we fix the problem.
Question if I'm not.
Yep.
Why did you make it any instead of a string?
Because I'll show you. Think about it for a second. How do you transform a date into a string?
No, I understand the file you constructed, but what's coming is a string here.
Yeah. But think about it from a compiler's point of view. How does a compiler know how to transform a date into a string? It doesn't, right? Because the compiler type, so a date and a string don't share an interface, so there aren't similarities between them. So the compiler is going to complain and is going to say, I can't transform a date into a string. There's no way that I can do it from a compiler's point of view. So instead, what you have to do is you have to tell it that it could be any type, so that it just ignores the type system for this specific instance. So that's why. That's a good question. And now you can see that we fixed it. So now we're getting our dates back. Awesome. So you've seen that I've done a little bit of mapping. I've transformed my book.added. I've forced it into a date. There's a few other stuff that we need to do though. The next thing that we have to do is we have to actually capture the search. So now if I want to find other books to add to my list, for example, Harry. I hit Harry, I hit enter, nothing's happening, right? So let's go fill that in. We have a search method, and we have a to-do in here that says we need to capture search query from a form input, and then we need to navigate to our search results. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do, I have up here this Angular router. So I don't know if you've used Angular 1, but there was a third-party library called UI router, and they've pretty much built it into Angular 2. So here I'm importing it, router, and you can see that I have a route set up that goes from /search, loads this thing called a search component that I haven't shown you yet, but it exists. So what I want to do is I want to create a property called search query. It's of type string. It's a property. And then what I want to say, I want to take a dependency, private router. So now I can say this.router.navigate. And this is a little bit weird syntax. I want to pass it the name of my route, which is search, and then I want to pass it the parameters. So I know that I need query. Okay. And if we go take a look at search component, you can see that that's the case, right? Because I have a public property called query. I have search results, and I have sort by, and I need to pass in the search query to my search component. So through routing, this is how I'm passing it in. So I'm capturing the search query from the form input, and then I'm going to navigate to my search view or my search component, and I'm going to do some search results. So here we have Harry. Okay, awesome. So now you can see that I've navigated to my search view. I've passed in my query string, my keyword, Harry, but there's no results. And that is pretty self-explanatory because there is nothing in my search component that is actually going out to my API calling search. So the next thing, you can imagine what I have to do. So let's go take a peek at my Web API controller. So this is my Web API controller, and if you're not familiar with Web API, it's just a really simple way to use like an MVC controller pattern to build like an API. So you can see that I have my main endpoint, which is API/books. All that's doing is returning my user list, so the books in my user list. And I can add a book, so that's post book, and I can also do a search. So this is what I want to call. I want to call this API method from my service. And now you might imagine that what I have to do here is I have to copy and paste. Okay, copy and paste, change this to search, but then I got to do a whole bunch of other stuff that I really don't want to do. And I thought that if I'm using TypeScript, it would make me a little bit more productive than this. I don't want to be copy and pasting, and this is a pattern that we see all the time, right? Because our JavaScript can't share code between the server side and the client side. So what I have to do is I have to create services that mirror pretty much almost exactly what my API is doing. I have to do what I did here, where I create my C# types. So I have my C# types. I have book. Book is my class. This is what I'm passing down through the API. Why do I have to go and create, interfaces and models and stuff in my client-side code just because I have it in my server-side? So what you're going to see now is a little bit of magic, and we don't need this book service anymore. I'm going to delete this. We don't need our book anymore because I'm going to delete it. And what you're going to see right now is within a minute or two, I'm going to do the last 20 minutes of the presentation in about 5 minutes. So I have my services, I have my models, I have some enums, I have some custom decorators here, and then I have, that's all I need. So let's go take a look at this for a second. This is using an amazing Visual Studio extension called Typewriter. So what Typewriter is basically T4 templating for TypeScript, and this is why I love Visual Studio. So what I've just done here is I've defined a template that is going to go and it's going to read this Web API controller, and what it's going to do is it's going to generate all that code that you just saw me write. Boom. You should be like, what just happened? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to mirror my server side and I'm going to mirror it on the client side so I don't have to write any code. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to take a look at everything that sits in my models directory, and guess what? I'm going to export a class, and that class is going to represent all my C# models. In fact, I'm going to do some cool stuff. You remember when I wrote that code that tried to create a new date from a string? I'm just going to do that automatically using ES7 decorators. So I have a decorator here called dateStringConverter. It's very simple. All I'm saying is go and get the setter for the property, intercept it, and if it's a type of string, transform it into a date. So let's take a look at what this does. So I hit save, and now watch the right side of the screen, right here. Models, oh look, there I got my book. So here's my book. So I got my ID, it's of type number. I got my title, it's a string. My author, it's a string. Hey, guess what? My added, it's a type date. And guess what? For the setter, it's using dateStringConverter. And if I'm not familiar with that, what that is, I can hit F12. I can even hit F12 here on decorators, and there it goes, and it tells me what's my decorator doing. So I got that. Now let's do the same thing for services. So I hit service. Creates book.service. This is all the code that we just wrote, except that it just generated it in about 5 seconds for me. So here I'm doing the same exact thing. I'm calling my get API books. I'm getting the JSON, and I've just created a helper function called from JSON, and this is what is generated through the T4 template. So I'm just setting the different properties. And the awesome thing about using getters and setters is that I can intercept the set, that's where I do that model.added. So in here I don't have to do something like new date from my string. I don't have to do that because I'm using getters and setters. So getters and setters, by the way, are pretty widely supported. In fact, all modern browsers support them. Most mobile browsers support them. So that's why I'm using getters and setters. If you haven't used them before, they're awesome. You should totally use them because they make it seem like you're just assigning to properties. So do that. And the last thing I have over here, my search component. I have this this sort by. So this is my sort by. This is how I'm sorting my search results, and it's a string, okay? Because I want it to be a little bit more friendly in the URL, so that when I say like sort by equals name, I'm sorting by name, okay? But on the C# side, what's actually happening is that these get translated to an enum, okay? And because I'm using Web API, I can just put my enum here, and it's supposed to coerce the value that comes in from the request into an enum type. So how can I ensure that people just don't put whatever they want here? Okay, so what I can actually do quick is I can declare a new type called sort by, and TypeScript is going to say, hey, I don't know anything about a sort by. Please tell me what you mean by a sort by. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this little template, and what's going to come out here is a really neat little file and also a really neat little pattern called a type alias. So what a type alias is it's just almost like imagine like a little search and replace. So what I'm saying is this is a new type called sort by, and what you're going to do, TypeScript compiler, is you're going to treat this as a type union. So type unions are a feature in TypeScript where I can say that a variable is a number or a string, or it's a number or a Boolean. We do this all the time in JavaScript, right? We have these overloads for functions that are like, pass in a string, you do this, pass in a number, you get this. We can model that in TypeScript using something called a type union, and that's what this little pipe operator is. Furthermore, those of you who enjoy using jQuery a lot will know that when you want to do event handlers, you have to always type in strings for everything, right? No more. You don't have to do that, because what you can say is you can create a little type alias that says type, on click equals click or whatever, and then you can just start typing in that. So now you get full refactoring support because TypeScript knows about your type. So all I'm doing here is I'm using string literal types. So I'm saying these are the types of my enum. These are the names of the properties. So what you're going to do is you're going to treat sort by as that special type. So what does that do? So now when I go and I look at IntelliSense, now as a developer I can see that not only is this a string, but it's a string that's restricted to these 3 values. So then if I try and say, for example, this dot sort by equals Kamran's awesome sort, right? What's going to happen there? It's going to say Kamran's awesome sort is not assignable to this type that you told me. So I'm preventing people from making some pretty easy mistakes to make. So this is what I'm talking about when I say that TypeScript helps prevent certain classes of errors. So this is not an error that you would probably create a unit test for, right? But you can actually create a sort by. So now that I have my service and I have my models, let's actually fill this in. So what I want to say is I want to say this dot query equals route params dot get, and I'm taking in from the query. And then I want to say this dot sort by equals this dot route params dot get sort by. I'm using the Angular route params helper, so it's just getting the values from the URL. So in my case, I also want to do URL decode. Let's do that. And then, oh wait, okay, there's a couple problems here. So first of all, I thought it was called URL decode, but that's not right. It's not called that. What is it called? I think it's called, what is it? Decode. Oh, okay, there it is. Yep, there it is. Decode URI. Okay, awesome. Thank you, TypeScript. And then I do sort by, and it's saying, hey, you're trying to get a string, and it has to be like one of these 3 values. Okay, I can do that. I can forcefully convert this to a sort by. And if there's blank, if there's no sort by, let's just use name. So now that's cool. Now let's call the search results. Let's go and get some search results. This dot book service dot get books search, and we're going to pass in our query this dot sort by, and there you can see the type union in there. And I'm going to subscribe to it, and we're going to get some results back if I can type. And we want to say this dot search results equals results. All right. So now we have all of our stuff. Let me just make sure everything is looking good and compiled. All right. And let's refresh this for a second. Let's see if it worked. Oh, we got a problem. What's the problem? It says bookservice.search is not a function, and that's because I did not save it. All right. Refresh. And there are our search results. So these are coming back from the API. So now I have my search results. Trying to add them to my list. I can't add them to my list, so I think I got to do that too, right? So let's go take a look on our search component. And what I want to do here is I actually just want to say this dot book service dot postbook, and I want my my book number. All right. And then I want to subscribe to that, right? And then say result, and we say alert. And I'm using a feature of TypeScript called text templating or string templating. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to say you added book $, and then result.title. So what just happened there? So because I'm subscribing to postbook returns a book. And from that book, I'm just going to output the title to the screen. So we have that. All right. Now let's see what we did. Hit refresh. Now I want to add, I don't know, what is Harry Potter even? So I add that. Hey, look, you added the book, What is Harry Potter even? Okay. Go back to my list. There it is at the bottom. Done. So there you go. That's everything. That's the entire demo. Now it's been implemented. So that's pretty awesome. All right. So if you want to get started, because all of that should have blown your mind, you can get started by using Visual Studio Code. You can also get started by downloading VS Community 2015. That's what I use at home. And so like I said, for Visual Studio Code, it's cross-platform, it's easy, it's simple, it's extensible, it has all sorts of features. It's great. If you want a little bit more metal, then you probably want to use VS Community. You can read the TypeScript tutorials, you can play with the samples, you can get familiar. This presentation is up on GitHub, so thank you so much. I hope that you learned something. Go forth and conquer. So I have a few minutes. Any questions that you have? Yes, sir.
Go back to your code, please.
Yes.
Your word query on line 28 has your good old single quotes that are vertical, yet your line 39 has the slightly italicized single quotes.
Yes.
Like what Microsoft Word would do for
Yep.
you, which usually blows up when I paste it in the code.
Okay. Yeah. So the text templating in TypeScript uses the single ticks to denote that you're going to be creating a text template. So that's why I do that. And then the single quotes I just use, it's just a personal preference. You can see that I'm not very consistent and I use double quotes sometimes. So that's where those single ticks come from. Other questions? How many people were pretty impressed by what you just saw? Yeah, excellent. Awesome. You're not impressed because you do this all the time. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff. This is some of the stuff that we do for like Excalibur. And you can see that all the documentation is available. It's pretty awesome. So makes working on really, really big projects much easier. So.
What was the client-side proxy generator template called?
Typewriter. Yeah, it's this guy right here. This guy, typewriter.
I've actually been on hiatus. I don't know what this is. I'll just tell you. All right. So
Were you using Web Essentials, by the way?
Yeah. Yep. I love Web Essentials. Thanks.